And so that brings us to our question, is Black history under threat in America? To help us understand what is going on, Calvin Dark joins me here in studio. He's the co-founder and president of RC Communications. Calvin, once again, welcome to Straight Talk Africa. Thanks for coming in to talk to us and help us understand what exactly is going on here. You know, this issue has really piqued my interest, especially as an immigrant to this country. And, you know, I got much of my schooling under South Africa's apartheid system. So I have my fair share of toxic levels of indoctrination and, you know, propaganda. And Calvin, I have a deep understanding of what it is to have your history either misrepresented or just missing altogether. I mean, you just don't get that back. So what is it about this particular course on African American history, which students, by the way, are not forced to take, are they? But what makes this such a hot button subject?
First of all, I am extremely thankful that I grew up around parents, and because they were a little bit older, I grew up around my great aunts, my Aunt Naomi in particular, whose grandparents were enslaved. And, you know, she didn't die until 2006. I was here in DC until then. I grew up hearing this history and having that education that I didn't always get in school. And so for me, it's very important, because it wasn't until I got out of North Carolina that I realized not everybody had that. Now, when it comes to what we're dealing with now, the most unfortunate thing is some of the biggest issues that we're dealing with in our culture and our society are rooted because people don't understand why they are the way they are, why there are laws that are in place, what the reaction to those laws is, because we don't teach it. And so, ironically, the people who are trying to stand in the way of teaching it, saying somehow that it helps children not be offended or feel as if they're responsible, it pushes back the date to when we can know it, understand it, and then move away from it. And so it is under attack, a lot of the Black history that should be taught in our schools. The unfortunate part is, if we continue to fight it, those issues don't go away until we address it.
And no country has a pretty history. I mean, the ugliness of the past is part and parcel of every country's history. I like what that young man said earlier, that we shouldn't exclude any part of the country's history. But let me get this straight. So students in America can take advanced placement courses for European studies, Latin American studies, Chinese language and culture. Are these courses under fire too, or is it just Black history?
It's Black history, and it's because of those unresolved issues. And one of the other reasons is, when we think about history, too often the word carries centuries with it, just because we think it being so long. I try to remind friends of mine, colleagues of mine, that my parents, you know, when they got married, they all went to segregated schools. The Voting Rights Act hadn't even taken place the first time my parents were able to vote after they got married. My high school where I went was integrated 9 years before I was born, okay? So we're not talking about history that is so far off that the people who were affected, I mean, they're still living. A lot of them are in Congress. And think about the generation after them, like myself. So I think that's why it's such a sensitive subject, because it really forces us to deal with a painful part of our history that people are still dealing with in their own lives. And I think that's why you don't see the same backlash against some of the other topics that students can and should take.
And you know, 100 years even is a short time in the history of a country, of course, and we often forget that because the imagery comes in black and white often, but we forget it's not that many generations ago. Now, this is, of course, all part of a national debate about which part of America's history which parts should be taught in schools. Who's driving the other side of this debate, and what is their argument? You mentioned earlier about not offending people and making people feel uncomfortable. History is uncomfortable.
I think one of the reasons, first, is ignorance, because I think if you look at a lot of the people who are fighting this fight, if you look at Governor Ron DeSantis, for example, he's in his 40s. You know, it isn't something that he had an authorship in 50, 60 years ago. However, because we haven't taught these things, there's a fear. that if we broach these subjects, that people, institutions, ideas that we have will be under attack. So I think that's one of the main reasons. The other is that we have so many issues that are intractable, where I don't even know all of the solutions, whether it's police brutality in African American communities, our fight for voting rights. We still have poverty that's based in an economic system that used a lot of the things that we're not teaching people about, like redlining, like Jim Crow and all of this. And I think that some people, it comes from racism for some. But I think for others, they realize that once you open this box, we've now got to tackle things that are more than history. We have to tackle things like who can get mortgages? Why do people live where they live? Why do we have laws with policing that are causing the situation we have now? And I think that's so scary for people that they would rather sweep it under the rug, or as my great aunt Naomi used to say, let the sleeping dogs lie. But the thing of it is they'll wake up one day, and so we need to deal with them as soon as we can.
I feel like your family members are right here at the table with us. I like that you invoke them. You know, I as a member of the African diaspora, I have visited the South. I've gone to Selma. I've done reporting there, and you know, it's something you have to see firsthand in America. And that experience taught me that in order to understand life today in this country, you cannot ignore that particular part of American history, because it will explain to you so much about why the society is the way it is. And I want to turn to the civil rights movement. Calvin, in your view, what does the movement look like today?
I think that a lot of the issue, we've made a lot of progress, okay? And it's a very kind of sensitive subject when people say, well, you know, when Barack Obama was elected, that was a milestone. It definitely was. I remember being in 6th grade, writing an essay about what I wanted to be, and at the time, I think I mentioned President of the United States. My teacher made me redo it, okay? Because she said, I need to be more realistic, okay? Now, my mom and daddy had an active conversation with that teacher afterwards, but I think that that was a milestone. However, milestones aren't the finish line, okay? A lot of the same things with voting rights we're still dealing with. A lot of the same issues with law enforcement we're still dealing with. So I think what people must understand, you can't let progress make you think that everything has been won. And if you admit that there's progress that has been done, that doesn't mean that you are saying the fight is over, okay? I think that we have made progress. There's still a lot that needs to be done. And I think that some of these efforts at now closing the book on history are obstacles to that.
Mm-hmm. I saw a headline recently in the Chicago Reporter, and it really grabbed me. And it said, nearly 50 years after the civil rights movement, why is equality still a question? Why is it still a question in this country where there is so much and should be more than enough for everybody?
I think that it's a very valid question. You know, academia in schools, be it from elementary, high school, to college, to graduate schools, those are the kind of conversations that need to happen there, because then you have those people that study it and come up with solutions, and then those solutions then filter out to public policy makers, and then we vote on them. That's the process. But if you cut off even studying those, that's why we're not having the discussions that we need to have. Also, I think what we need to realize is our society looks a lot different than it did 50 years ago, okay? It's not just black and white, okay? You have a lot of people who are immigrants who aren't black or white. I remember when I was in school in North Carolina, we have a huge Latino population. A good friend of mine in 5th grade said, I'm not black or white, which box do I fit into, okay? That's something that a lot of people are thinking about now. To address those issues of what it means to be an American, what it means to be equal, we've got to start at the root. Because guess what? Not only do we have to solve this for black and white people, we've got to solve this for all of the other races and ethnicities and mixtures of those that are now here that maybe weren't in their numbers 50 years ago, who have a place here and deserve to be here. We can't address those issues, though, until we address the root issues of our dysfunction over equality.
I wish we could have continued that conversation, because that always interests interests me a lot. As an immigrant who is mixed race, who is from Africa, I'm very curious and always very interested to see the racial dynamics in this country that predominantly play out between black and white, but we understand what the history is there, but that America looks different now, and a lot of things change along those lines. But we'll have that conversation
again. And we're the same color.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I change colors, Calvin. So, but thank you so much for coming in, and thank you for helping us understand what exactly this debate is about. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Calvin is the president and co-founder of RC Communications. Always great to have him here with us.